Well, welcome. Tonight, for every parent in the Milford area, the topic that has come up and is discussed over and over and over is how's the school doing in the middle of this pandemic? And we have one of the key people that's affecting the challenges or dealing with the challenges. So why don't we start with an introduction?
Hi, good evening, Al. I'm Kevin McIntyre, Superintendent of the Milford Public Schools. Very happy to be here.
Kevin, everybody is worried. Everybody is curious. How are the kids doing?
That's a complicated question. I think some of our kids are doing really well. I think some of our kids are struggling. You know, the pandemic has impacted, our community and our families in a number of different ways. A number of families have been hit hard by economic impacts. Our scheduling has been very different than what it typically is in the spring. We started with learning opportunities and moved into kind of an online schedule. In the fall, we opened up with a hybrid program where students were in school for 2 days a week, remote for 1 day a week, and asynchronous for 2 days a week. And now, due to the rising coronavirus numbers, we've been in remote since November 23rd. So I think the lack of like social connection, I think, is no different for our students than for many adults. I think it's having a negative impact on some of our students, and it's manifesting itself in a lot of different ways, from some challenges academically to challenges with mental health.
But now, describe, because some people know and some people don't, what those terms mean.
Which one? Give me one to throw out there.
The ones that you're saying we're dealing with. Okay, some kids are in school. I understand some kids are out. Some kids are in on the fourth Tuesday of the third Monday.
So
what are the options that parents have?
So in the summer, I think in probably July, we asked parents to make a choice whether they wanted to be part of our in-school program, which started in a hybrid model. In a hybrid model, the students were, again, in school 2 days a week, live in person. They were in a remote classroom 1 day a week, and then 2 days a week they were doing what we call asynchronous learning, where the teachers provide a variety of learning activities. Some of our teachers tape lectures for the students to watch during the day. They have assignments, whether it's writing a paper, doing a project, completing an assessment, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a 2-1-2 model where they're live for 2 days, remote for 1 day, and doing asynchronous learning for 2 days. And then another group of families did a fully remote model where they were with a teacher in a remote setting for 5 days a week. And we've been using Zoom as our platform. So our teachers would work with the students on Zoom, each and every day in that model. And that's what currently the vast majority of our students are in right now. On November 23rd, because of the rising COVID-19 numbers, both locally and across the state, and you could say across the country and across the world, we shifted to remote learning and have been in remote learning since I think it was the week before Thanksgiving. As of Monday, our special education sub-separate students started with half days back in person. And we're in the second day of that, and that's gone relatively well so far. We're also doing in-person athletics as well as our music programs, meeting kind of small quartets and strings groups are meeting on a regular basis.
So now the special needs kids are all in-person learning?
Not all of our students with special needs. This is a subset of our students with special needs. It's a lot of our students who are on the autistic spectrum and students who have kind of significant developmental delays or other pretty significant special needs.
So these are the neediest of the group as far as individual attention.
These are students who are in kind of specialized programming that is typically outside of our general education classrooms. They might, some of the students may jump into inclusion opportunities, for 1 or 2 blocks a day, but for the most part, they're in pretty specialized programming.
So now this is the parents that opt to have them in, right?
Correct. Well, it's the parents, and we've actually reoffered kind of live programming as of yesterday.
So they have the option of doing remote or sending their kids to school.
Correct. The parents of students with special needs had the same kind of options at the beginning of the year that parents with students that weren't in our special education program had. They could do a fully remote program, or they could do kind of a hybrid program.
Now, did the teachers all opt in, or do they have no choice?
You know what? At the beginning of the year, we offered all of the teachers an opportunity if they wanted to take kind of a 1 year unpaid leave. They were able to do that if they felt like they couldn't participate in the program, and their job would be waiting for them in the 21-22 school year.
Okay, so
and we had some educators that took advantage of that, and that was not just our teachers, but also custodians, cafeteria workers, secretaries. Everybody had that option.
So even support staff could take a year off.
Correct.
But that's unpaid.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And we do have some of our teachers who are working fully remote, but the majority of our teachers are doing either, or at the beginning of the year anyways, we're doing some combination of in-person and, potentially remote learning. So at the elementary level, for example, we had maybe a classroom or two, depending on the grade level, where we had a fully remote classroom. So there was a third grade classroom of students whose parents had selected the full remote model. At the secondary level, starting in middle school, if I was like an English teacher and I was teaching 5 classes, 4 of my classes might be live classes, and 1 of them would be a remote section. And similarly at the high school, you might teach like 1 remote section and 3 live sections.
Now, if I opted to have my child at fully remote, how do people, if it's a high school kid, I could see it. They're old enough to have responsibility, but a first, second, or third grader?
It's actually pretty incredible. I've had the opportunity to kind of be on both sides of the camera for the elementary classrooms. I've sat in with a teacher who's teaching the remote class, and I've been kind of in a Zoom room with the students. And I have to say, the work that they're doing online, it certainly is different than what happens in the classroom, but it's amazing, what these teachers at the elementary level are doing to engage their students. And I have to say, I was in Woodland Elementary School, I'd say about maybe 2 months ago, and there was a gym teacher sitting in the middle of the gym on a table in front of a computer, and he was rolling like a big dice. And they were playing like a bingo game where whatever number came up, the students had to do a particular exercise so they could fill out their bingo cards. So they're doing, some really creative kind of engaging things online. But again, it doesn't replicate what we had last year at this time, where students were attending 5 days a week in person in kind of, our more traditional, typical school experience.
Well, I would think you can't beat having a teacher in front of you.
It makes a huge difference, because when students are online, and this goes for parents and for students, I could be playing like Minecraft or something and tell my mom or dad, hey, I'm in the middle of my math class. And I know you're going to be shocked by this, Al, but some students actually do try to pull that off. And the other thing is the teachers, like, if you go into any classroom, teachers are walking around and moving through the classroom, and they can kind of see what's on a student's paper or on their Chromebook and really get a sense of, hey, this kid's got it, this student's struggling with a particular concept, and they can kind of adjust instruction pretty quickly. Teachers have had to adapt how they do kind of formative assessment to determine, what kids are getting it and what kids aren't. And we've put in a few technology tools that have helped to support that. But it's different. And, it's a learning curve for the teachers, it's a learning curve for our students, and it's a learning curve for our parents.
I'm just amazed when I think of like my grandson. I'm biased, but he's a great kid.
Yep, I'm sure he is.
Keeping his attention focused. It seems like I get a very narrow window, and then it's like, okay, I'm on to the next one.
Yeah.
How do teachers keep first, second, third graders focused for 6 hours?
Well, one thing is they're not on for 6 hours straight, because I think that would be torturous for anybody. How we kind of set the schedules up is we've used like, 15, 20 or 30-minute chunks with, a break from online, where they're maybe completing a task, taking a break, eating a snack, eating lunch. So there's kind of smaller sessions throughout the day. Because I think if we had, a kindergarten student, for example, or first grader, turn the computer on at, 8 in the morning and then turn it off at 3, we'd have to peel them off the couch or the chair that they were sitting in. So we try to give breaks throughout the day. We encourage movement during those breaks, and teachers try to do things in really manageable chunks of time so that, they're not doing like one thing for 45 minutes straight. They're doing something for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, and then moving on to the next activity or the next learning objective.
Well, I mean, I can see the danger there, because not that any adult would be doing their email while they're on a Zoom call.
I've never heard that happen.
You sit there and say, we can't focus people in the company to not do it. And not that
Right.
I would ever,
No, absolutely not.
but you sit there and say, if you can't get an adult to focus that long, I don't know how you get kids. It must be amazing what the teachers are doing to keep their focus.
They're doing they're trying to be as interactive as they possibly can online. And that's been, they're moving students into breakout groups, they're doing jam boards, they're working on Google Docs together, watching short video clips and responding, doing kind of virtual turn and talks. So there's a lot of things that they're doing. But there's also a lot of limitations to, online learning that, things that you can do in a classroom, like our robotics program. My office is located in the high school. And when I walk down to see our athletic director, Peter Boucher, or go down to check on how our little guys are doing in the preschool, I walk down the corridor where they're doing robotics, and I constantly see students in the hallways working with, robots, having, programming them, having them do tasks. And that's very challenging online. You can do some simulations, but there's a hands-on piece that we lose with online instruction.
Well, I mean, the biggest concern is, okay, we've got a year. We're coming up, and it looks like the rest of this year, nothing's going to change.
Correct. I think there's a good chance we're going to move back to hybrid at some point, but I don't see us going fully back into school like people remember it and kind of love and cherish it.
Hopefully we'll do that in the fall, but a year's gone by, or a year
Yep.
and a quarter. Are the kids going to be far behind where they should be?
I think there's going to be some students. We've had some students that have had a hard time. Like you talked about engagement. We have a portion of our student population that is really struggling to engage and jump onto online classes or come to the in-person classes when they're there, because things have been so different and difficult. And I think those students we're going to have to do a fair amount of remediation when we get back to kind of normal learning, or possibly some kind of summer programming to catch students up. There's another group of students who show up consistently. I think are doing pretty well day to day, but it's at the high school level, we typically see somewhere between 1 to 5% of our students earn failing grades in a semester or quarter. That number's tripled this year, and a lot of it has to do, which is it's a huge difference, and a lot of that has to do with if you show up, we can usually get you across the finish line and get you there, because our teachers are dedicated professionals. They're creative, they're persistent, and they care. But if we can't get you into the Zoom room or the classroom, we have a really hard time kind of catching you up and engaging you.
Well, again, I kind of don't worry as much about the little guys, because they've got 10 years to make up.
Correct.
First grade, second grade, you can augment at home, but they got plenty of years. I worry more about the 7th, 8th, 9th graders. I mean, chemistry classes, can you really do chemistry remotely and have the same knowledge transfer?
Well, I think there's a lot you can do, and I think there's a lot our teachers have done, and I think there's a lot of programs out there that do kind of lab simulations, but because you're in the kind of the STEM field, nothing beats being in a lab and actually working with the materials, the chemicals, and kind of engaging with your classmates or colleagues kind of live. And even when we were in person, there was a lot of restrictions on, what we could do, sharing materials, working collaboratively, so that changed a little bit too, because traditionally at the high school level, we want our kids kind of talking with each other, engaging with each other. If they're in a biology class, if they're, doing a dissection or doing, some kind of lab and kind of following through a hypothesis, we really want them to engage with their fellow students. And that's not as possible with COVID, whether we're live or we're remote. And I think teachers have made adjustments, but sometimes some classes and some academic topics are ripe for online instruction. You can do, I think, a lot for history, a lot for English, but if you're doing science and you want to get into some hard lab work, or I mentioned robotics, or some of our music classes, or some of the programming we do that's more vocationally oriented, like our building trades group is very difficult to do online. PE classes, there's I think the gym teachers are being very, very creative with what they're doing. They're almost becoming kind of Peloton or online Zumba instructors, where they're running kind of exercise classes and trying to talk about fitness, nutrition, and well-being.
No, I could see myself in that gym class. 1, 2, 1. I don't have this rotund shape for lack of trying.
It's funny. One of the gym teachers at the elementary level does Star Wars yoga, so they do different poses connected to characters, and they try to kind of connect different things that they're doing to kids' interests, which I think is fantastic. But they're really adjusting what they're doing, and that's across the board. And the thing that I think some people don't realize is we've had to change when we reopen school just about every way in which we operate. Teachers right now, like our classrooms. So if you're in, Kevin McIntyre's third period chemistry class, you're either in cohort A or cohort B, which is half the class. So what the teacher is doing is each of their classes is 2 separate classes that they're kind of have on slightly different trajectories, because cohort A is live Monday and Tuesday. Cohort B is asynchronous Monday and Tuesday. Everybody's together on Wednesday virtually, and then it flips on Thursday and Friday. And what's a little simpler now that we're remote is, cohort A and cohort B now are together, and they're kind of following the same virtual class. The downside to that, obviously, is you'll lose the socialization, which is so critical to education when you're remote. There's only, as much as I enjoy being with you online, it's so much better when we're in the studio.
Well, I mean, you think about it. Part of my education in high school and is the socialization, learning how to deal with kids.
Yeah. Well, you learn from each other, and I think everybody who works in any kind of field, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of collegiality, and you rarely work outside of a team anymore. Gone are the days of Willie Loman kind of alone on the out on the sales calls. There's a lot more collaboration
Now,
today.
if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching my class virtually, I have 20 little pictures up on my screen. Is that how it works?
Well, what a lot of teachers have done is we've purchased a second screen for teachers, so they can put their material on one screen and they can look at the students on the other screen, and it's really helped with kind of managing students, because it is very difficult to kind of, you go on a Zoom call where there's a lot of people, it's pretty easy to lose your focus quickly. So what we have is the teacher has a screen that they're kind of instructing from, whether it's like we're doing right now where their face is in the picture, or they're doing some kind of presentation kind of platform or some kind of interactive
Well, a lot
platform.
of us have 2 screens. I've gotten used to having 2 screens. It'd be hard going back to 1.
I'm still a one screen guy at this point, but I do see the value of it.
Now, I was a 1 screen guy until one of my techies plugged in the second screen.
Yep.
And then it was like, ooh, this is nice.
Yeah.
Of course, the real techies now are got 3 screens.
Well, we have a few folks that do that. I think Josh Otlin, our high school principal, is guilty of that. when he's pulling up 3 or 4 different data tables at the same time.
How are the teachers doing? Everything we're talking about, as I think through it, and I may be naive, seems like a lot of extra work. on the team.
It really is. And I think, my hat is off to the teachers. I think they've done a phenomenal job. They work tirelessly on behalf of our students. We had a COVID task force meeting this past Monday night. And one of the things we talked about was like re-engaging students that were disengaged. And we have a few teachers on the group, and they were telling stories about how, they're visiting homes, they're making, multiple phone calls, they're texting, they're using different apps that we use just to try to get students back and parents back into the fold. So I think the teachers are doing incredible work. They've been unbelievably flexible. And I'm really humbled to be able to serve them as their superintendent, because the work that they're doing makes me really proud. And I hope we can go back to, regular school, which is challenging enough, because I do worry about, teacher, administrator, and staff burnout, because it's a very different job right now. I read an article today. I'm going to just interrupt you for 1 second. I read an article today that they were saying that the National Principals Association did a survey, and 45% of principals are considering leaving the profession because of the stress related to COVID, which is, to me, is an astounding number.
That is incredible, because they were always the most stable. Not
Correct.
to pick on you, but superintendents seem to move every 3 years in Massachusetts.
Oh, we come and go, baby.
I'm glad you haven't, but when I looked at the statistics,
yeah,
it seemed like not a coincidence that a school board cycle and a superintendent's longevity seem to run in sync.
100%. I think the numbers I saw were like 2.9 years or 3.9 years on average, which is, I think, shorter than an NFL career. But you know what NFL stands for is not for long.
No, God. No, but you think about it. You come to work, when you choose a position, you're choosing it with the board you're supporting if you're at a high enough level, the management team that's around you. And if they change that every 3 years, it could be like, if you bring a sports analogy, you came because you're the best runner in the area and the coach is a running coach.
Right.
All of a sudden, 3 years later, coach comes in and only believes in passing.
Right.
But
right. And I think that's why you see so much movement, because, and I think that's what's been the challenge in public education, because when leadership changes, there's stops and starts for everybody. Because what I believe in, the next person would say, hey, I think that, McIntyre is full of it. This is the way we're going to go. And it like you said, we move from passing to running, then back to passing again. And, I think that leads to teacher frustration too. And that's why, the districts that have kind of more stable leadership tend to do better in the long term.
Well, we've been blessed over the years because we have such a dedicated school force. I brought it up before. I'll not ever forget that when Milford was really strapped for cash, I was reading in the paper about all these towns around us that their staff would defer their raises, get a double raise the end of the year, which never made sense to me, because if I can't afford to pay them now, how am I going to afford a double raise? But our school personnel, through the union, which again, what a unique union to step up and come to the FinCom and say, we'll forego our raise if you promise to use that money to keep our teachers and not lay them off.
Mm-hmm. And that's been honestly the spirit that we've engaged in this year as well. And I'm sure you've read the paper and seen news stories of, horror stories happening between school committees, superintendents, and teachers associations. And we really haven't had that here. It's been very collaborative. I tend to, check in with the union leadership on almost a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis. And when we work through the issues, and are there disagreements? Absolutely. But, we look at it more as a family, and we kind of work through it like that. And I think that's kind of gotten us through a lot of, challenging times. And it's definitely served us well through kind of the reopening of school and some of the challenges we've had around, COVID-19. Well,
99% of the times, in a couple months, the FinCom will get up and say, we're broke, we're destitute. School committee will come and say, if we don't get a 99% increase in budget, we're in trouble.
That's a low estimate for this year, Al.
There you go. And somewhere in the middle, we come up with what's realistic.
Absolutely.
And we growl, we groan, and then at the end, we come together. You know?
And that's been kind of and I think that's the thing that's attractive for a lot of people about this town is there's a real sense of community. And we've had so many people step up in different circumstances. Like when we first opened school, and we had a lot of kids who weren't getting breakfast and lunch. Carla Tuttle and her team stepped right up to the plate. And I think we in the spring served over 120,000 or 150,000 meals, and they just needed things. And we've had some families, because they had a COVID positive member, couldn't go to pick up the food, so we had staff that would deliver it to the families. And that's not a lot of, we don't really publicize that a great deal, but those are a lot of things that go on that, because I think the people care here.
Well, anybody who doesn't know Carla should be worried. Because when you sit there and say, how are you going to continue feeding all these kids? It seems like a Herculean effort. Anybody who knows the Olivas, somehow just shake your head and say, there's no way I believe Carla will let a kid go hungry.
And that never happens. It absolutely never happens.
What are the big changes? I mean, Lenny sent buses around Milford a year ago, picked up kids, brought them to the schools. Now, all of a sudden, half the kids aren't there, half are. What has really changed inside the schools?
Well, we've actually, we've completely restructured our building. So, all of our library media centers have turned into 1, 2, or 3 classrooms. We've had to repurpose space throughout buildings. If you look on the floors of the hallways, there's arrows saying, this is the side you go, to the left. This is the side you go to the right. Some hallways are one way. Some hallways are 2 ways. We have hand sanitizing stations throughout the building. Each classroom has a hand sanitizing station. Each day when we had live school, we were disinfecting every single classroom in the evening. So we've completely restructured our school buildings. Our lunchrooms, which is really the most depressing part of this whole thing, is our lunchrooms that everybody sits individually 6 feet apart, and everybody has an assigned seat, and it kind of breaks my heart when I look at it, because lunch is the one time of the day where kids can kind of kick back and cut loose a little bit and hang out with their friends. And this year, that just hasn't been the case. And we've been able to manage recess at the elementary level and kind of a modified recess at the middle school level. But it's really kind of heartbreaking to see the way we set up the cafeteria. But it's enabled us to contact trace, keep 6 feet of physical distancing, and really kind of positively manage some of the risks that related to the COVID-19.
Now, reading in the Times, the New York Times, that the New York City schools are probably the safest place for kids.
Mm-hmm.
The transmission rate is lower there than anywhere in their districts. How is it in Milford?
Yeah, I would say the same. We had one case of in-school transmission, and that was a situation where a couple members of our school community weren't following the protocols. But what we were seeing, Al, is a lot of positive cases that were emanating from, and this is kind of what we're seeing nationally too, small group gatherings in homes or out in the community, and that sort of thing. So what we were starting to see is groups of kids having to be quarantined, or teachers having to be quarantined. Right before we shut down and moved to remote, we had a full team at Woodland that had to go remote because all the teachers were considered close contacts. So although we didn't really see transmission, we did have to follow the CDC guidelines around, who a close contact was. And that changed, I want to say 4 times from July and through today. We followed 4 different procedures. One thing I do want to, give kind of a shout out or a commendation to, along with our teachers and staff, is the Board of Health and Dr. Jackie Murphy, who've been absolutely phenomenal to work with. And she's been a tremendous partner in making sure that we've been able to kind of open and manage a lot of this, and has been very responsive to, my questions, whether they've been right on point or absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, they are newbies. I mean, I think Lenny is the least experienced with 35 years on the board of health.
Yeah.
So, if you're looking for experience to help you go through a pandemic, I don't know that we can ask for better than the Board of Health we have, and Jackie seems to have fit right in.
They've been absolutely awesome. I can't speak highly enough. And I have to say the same thing about police and fire. Whenever we've needed anything, we've worked together, and that's, it just speaks to that spirit of community. And I think, it's not just the Milford Public Schools family, it's the Milford family. And working with the chiefs, they've been just awesome to work with too. So I
Well,
can say, like, it's just been great.
if you look back, and you say, who's at the helm? And Piggy, I can't say that anymore. Chief Spaghetti, when you're used to calling somebody that you went to high school with, you have just an inherent trust. Here's the Spaghetti family and, both sides of it, living in Milford, raising their kids, dedicating themselves. Just makes me feel better that I don't have to explain to an outsider who we are and what we believe.
Mm-hmm. And a great example of that, Al, is we were trying to do some things for our senior class last year because they didn't have like the prom, they didn't have all the end of year activities, and they stepped right up to the plate to help us run the senior parade, the car parade, which was a great event. They really supported our graduation, which was very different than our typical graduations. We brought in a couple of jumbotrons because we had to spread people out more so everybody could kind of see what was happening and hear what was happening. And police and fire, Chief Nelson and Chief Spaghetti stepped right up to the plate and really said, just worked the logistics with us. And, they sat down with our principal, Josh Otlin, and, Jackie Murphy from the Board of Health. And we just, thought about what all the problems or potential obstacles or issues would be. And we just worked through them kind of systematically. And it was great.
Well, I remember when I had to take the picture for the yearbook, I think back in 2005, the only way I could figure of getting everybody in the picture was to climb on the roof.
Right.
And back then, Chief Tui came and rolled a ladder truck and sent me up the ladder so we could get all, 300 kids in the one picture.
Yep.
And that just, it just kind of feels that's Milford.
Yeah, yeah, and they've been, and like I said, they've been absolutely awesome, and it's been consistent, with everybody all the way through. It's everybody, steps up to the plate. It's funny. I was talking to an assistant principal today, and he was one of his jobs is kind of managing Chromebooks for the school. And when he was home, his significant other said, why are you counting Chromebooks and checking plugs for people? Shouldn't that be somebody else's job? And he said, it's what needs to be done, so it's what I have to do. And so, and that's kind of encompasses, I think, the attitude and kind of the essence of what we've been about since this has started.
Now, high school, how do you keep the kids apart?
One of our biggest worries coming in was kids wouldn't wear their masks,
Right.
Kids wouldn't stay apart. They actually did a really good job. And, if you remind them a couple times, like in the classes, it's perfect. In the cafeteria, like I said, they're spread out, but it's a little depressing. And they're kind of like magnets. Like they start a little bit further apart and then they start coming together as, they start talking. But, I think if you give the students general reminders, they've been exceptional. And I have to say, like, all of our teachers and our administrators were so blown away by how the students responded to all the changes that had to take place. Like, the students, willingly, sanitized their hands when they walked into the building. They kept their masks on. They kept distanced. The passing times, the kids did a pretty good job. That was one of the challenges, but overall they did phenomenally.
That's amazing because I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I come from a hugging culture.
Yeah.
Hug.
Yeah.
And the idea of, how many times I've seen people and you go up and then you hold out your hand.
Yeah. You do the elbow bump.
The elbow bump but
yeah.
Think about boyfriends and girlfriends who can't see each other at night or,
it's been really, really hard for people. But, when we were in person, people did a great job. Our kids did a great job. Our teachers did a great job. There was a lot of apprehension about how, the students would respond to it for just the reasons you're saying, because, with the little kids, you think like they're kind of, creatures of kind of, just impulse.
Yeah.
And, they're just going to do what they're going to do. and the older kids, are very social, and with the hugging, and holding hands, and just kind of laying on top of each other, and they were able to make adjustments. It was great. And I got to say, I was mildly surprised, because I figured most kids would do it, but we'd have a group of students that we'd have challenges with, but we really didn't have challenges. I think the students were so happy to be live in school that they wanted to kind of keep it going.
And I'm just thinking our culture works against us, because when my grandkids come in, I get a hug.
Right.
And then you sit there and say, wait a second. They come in, they hug my darling bride, they hug me, they hug their aunt. And then you say, what are you teaching them? We've talked about, are we setting them up to fail when they go to school? Because they just assume hugging is normal.
Right. Right. And I think that's been an adjustment, because we've got a lot of our educators that are, I think, like, we mentioned Carla earlier. She's very gregarious, and, we've got a lot of folks like that, and there's multi-generational families, and, there's that familiar feeling. And I think, people, it's been a struggle for some people, because they want to come up and give you a big hug, but we've adjusted, and unfortunately that's, one of the many negative adjustments we've had to make because of COVID.
What's going to happen to the kids as far as, proms are out of the question. But, I think about first Thanksgiving and how many people, we had the most boring Thanksgiving, because normally my darling bride cooks a Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
She brings this monstrous bird in the house, and we have 20 some odd people show up. This year we had 5.
Mm-hmm.
But you hear that a lot of people got together and became super spreaders. And then Christmas. Yeah. Now, Christmas, we're almost, the number of days away where we'd be worried about, symptoms now showing up. How about at school? Are you seeing problems because of the holidays, or?
Yeah, we saw, just like I think the community did, we saw a big uptick in student cases, the 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. The last 2 weeks, we've seen like a leveling off and a little bit of a decrease, both in the daily case rate and the positivity rate. But I expect this Thursday, when the dreaded COVID numbers come out from the state each week, that we're going to see a bump, and we're probably going to see an even bigger bump the following week. And then hopefully we start to see maybe a leveling off after that.
Yeah, well, I was amazed when people were publicly saying, see, we didn't see any bump for the Christmas rush. And it's like, it's been 4 days.
Yeah.
The titer hasn't been built high enough.
Well, what I can say is we saw a bump after Labor Day. We saw a bump after Halloween. We saw a significant bump after Thanksgiving. And our numbers are still really high right now, but I still expect to see a little bit of an escalation the next 2 weeks. The other concern that we have is the new strain of COVID that's supposed to be a little more contagious, and we're not sure how that's going to impact some of our protocols and guidelines. And I think we're still waiting for information from kind of the science and public health community on that.
But it's amazing, Kevin, when everybody starts to freak out over the virus is mutated.
Yeah.
It's a virus. It mutates.
Right.
That's why when you think about the regular, I hate to say regular, but the influenza vaccine, normally I think it's 2 strains from the previous year, and then they predict their best guess for a new strain coming.
Right.
You get 3 strains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the virus wasn't changing and mutating every year, we'd never have to change, the vaccination. So I guess when they started talking about the new strain that they found in Southern England being more contagious, that worried me less than if it was more virulent.
No, I agree with that. I think more contagious we can kind of mitigate. With the hospitals being almost maxed out right now, if there was, worsening symptoms due to like a new strain, that's significantly more concerning.
So now, if the parents were to ask you, what should I be doing? If I've got a small child, how do I deal with if he's going to be or she's going to be home? Okay, either I'm paying a nanny or somebody, or I'm not going to work.
Yeah, that's been the biggest challenge, I think, for our families is when we've, whether we've been in hybrid where they've had to come up with, 3 additional days of childcare out of 5, or we're, currently remote where it's 5 days out of 5. My heart goes out to the families because, some families, the parents are able to work remotely, but some, parents are not able to work remotely because they're doing a job that requires them to be on site. And that's where the big challenges come into play. What we've seen happen is a number of our families have kind of come together and said, hey, I'll watch, and they become almost a mini bubble, and I'll watch your children during the day while you work the first shift, and you'll watch my children at night and give them dinner while I do the second shift. So we're seeing some of that. We're seeing a lot of grandparents step up to the plate and support. There's a number of creative solutions, but it's really one of the biggest challenges because at one point, I want to say the number was either 28 or 38% of our adult population in Milford was unemployed due to the pandemic, which is probably 7 or 8 times the regular number.
That's a big concern because a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck.
Correct.
Or whatever little reserve we had got eaten up over the last year because I wasn't working.
Right.
So now you turn around and say, okay, I'm going to face this for at least another 6-8 months. How do I get over the hump?
Yeah, and we've partnered with the YMCA, who've provided some support to some families. Some state agencies have provided some support, but it's been a real challenge, and that's why, like, it's interesting. We had a parent kind of send me an email and said, geez, we really need to take advantage of your breakfast and lunch program, but I can't get there because I'm working during the day. So I had a conversation, and I know I keep bringing up Carla, but I love her, is that, we started offering evening hours where we give the meals out at night. So we make it, we make some adjustments like that are, not revolutionary, but hopefully provide some additional support. I'm hopeful at some point in the not too distant future, we can kind of go back to hybrid to bring, to reduce some of the burden. At one point in the year, I was optimistic that we'd come back maybe in May or June and be kind of a little more normal. I don't know if that's going to happen until the fall at this point, just based on the rollout of the vaccine so far.
Well, I mean, you start looking at, we're going into the middle of January.
Correct.
Most people won't be inoculated for months. So I don't know how you step back, because I would imagine the challenge that you face is if Johnny has COVID and goes to class, not only does he now spread it to his class, but there's a teacher in that room.
Right.
Who probably has a child in another school. And it just
you can see where it falls apart pretty quickly. And, part of the reason why when students are in person, we have where they are every part of the day, including the bus. So like if you go into, like if you're in the high school, you have an assigned seat in every single class and lunch. And a lot of our high school students, some of them drive, some of them take the buses, but we know exactly, it sounds kind of very big brotherish. We know exactly where you are every single point of the day. But I've had to work with each of our principals multiple times to kind of backtrack and contact trace. And when we weren't certain, or if we felt like somebody maybe wasn't sitting where they were supposed to, we go to our cameras in the cafeteria and, double check to make sure that they didn't swap out. So you could sit next to your friend and I could sit next to my friend, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, the whole privacy issue comes up. I was going to ask you, are you worried about the anti-vaxxers?
There's two new there's the vaccine coming out for the COVID-19, but there's also the new requirement for the flu vaccine for all students. And they moved the deadline to February. I think it was originally January 1st. Now it's February, I think 28th. But I would say that, the vast majority of folks in Massachusetts, the number actually was higher than I thought. About 85 or 87% of school-age children get vaccinated for the flu each year. So that's only like a 13% delta. Um, there might be a little more trepidation for the COVID vaccine, uh, and that could be problematic for next year. Whether we can actually start live, depending on the percentage of adults and children that get vaccinated. That could cause us problems in the fall next year.
Yeah, I've had no issue with saying I'm not going to demand that you be vaccinated for mumps, measles, rubella, anything. You have the right as an American to say no. My problem is you don't have the right to come into a public school and infect my grandson.
Yeah, and that's going to be the tricky kind of public policy discussion that's going to be had. I think at the Board of Education level, the governor's office is, because what do we do with these students? Because there are some, legitimate opt-outs right now if you have, if you've shown kind of a history of allergies to vaccinations.
Well, no, if you have a medical condition where you're allergic,
yeah,
I have more sensitivity to that. But it doesn't obviate the problem that you could come in with mumps, measles, come in with COVID and infect my grandson.
Right. And that's going to be our challenge kind of, as we go forward. And if I could say how that's going to play out, I'd give you your picks for the football card this weekend, Al, for a wild card weekend.
Well, again, I wonder if it is going to be at a local level.
It's hard to say because some of the things that I thought would be state level decisions have fallen to municipalities and towns and cities. Other things that I thought would be a local decision have been picked up by the state, and it hasn't really followed a tremendous kind of logic train in a lot of cases. So I can't say how it's going to play out with any certainty.
No, I'm cautious about having too much at a municipal level because, we could ask our 3 selectmen to issue a memo. COVID is not allowed in Milford. Therefore, once you hit the border, park your COVID.
Right.
But
it just doesn't work that way.
In towns around us are going to affect us because we're going to go to the Lowe's. We're going to go to the Stop and Shop, even if you don't want to go out.
Right.
If you can't afford the delivery charges, you're going to go to Stop and Shop and all the grocery stores. And it's not just Milford people in there. So I start worrying that there's got to be at least at a state level. But again, then I could say if you live in Bellingham, well, Woonsocket's right there.
Right.
So you want some uniformity so that if they go to the stores.
Well, that's the challenge in New England because aside from Maine, we're a lot of really small states. And, if you live like where we are in Milford, we're very close to Rhode Island. The northern part of Massachusetts, you're, New Hampshire or Vermont. And, people without question would go back and forth between state lines. And, it's challenging for folks who have to, work or go to school or go to doctor's appointments and that sort of thing. And you almost have to have kind of consistency regionally.
How has the pandemic affected the school choice activities?
So we've really seen, and it's interesting, and I'll answer another question too, is we haven't seen, and I don't have the final numbers for this year, but overall our numbers are down, but a lot of that is due to we reduced the enrollment in the preschool. So we're down about 100 kids in the preschool just because of space. The way the preschool works, we had to have the classes in for whatever their schedule was for the kind of the full schedule. So we couldn't bring as many kids into the preschool. What we haven't seen overall is we haven't seen the influx of students like in August and September like we typically do, and we haven't seen kind of the January, and we're not quite through that yet. But we're just not seeing that kind of big bump in students. In terms of school choice, I'd say more families have chosen to homeschool their children than typical. So we've seen more of that than we've seen kind of. I haven't really seen a clear impact on school choice at this point.
Yeah, because I was wondering, would I school choice my child to another town, would I continue doing that? Or if it's remote anyway?
We did see, what we did see, Al, that was interesting is we saw some families that lived in Worcester move to Milford because Worcester started the year remote and we were in person. And
Huh?
so we probably had, somewhere between like 10 and 15 families from Worcester and maybe like half a dozen from Framingham that moved in because they knew those two districts were remote and we started the year in person. So we did see a little bit of that.
Did they stay?
I can't say because it's kind of early on, but I think for the most part they have.
No, that's
Yeah,
what
so
are
that
the
was
big,
that was the one interesting dynamic that we did see in terms of enrollment at the beginning of the year.
I have to ask you, budget wise,
Yeah,
do you still have too much money and not enough to spend it on?
that's always our problem. Always, that's the annual problem. We're like, so this year we're buying gold buckets for our custodians.
There you go. But I mean, seriously now, how does the pandemic, I mean, I would think PPE and, different expenses go way up.
So yeah, so we had a pretty significant influx of federal and state grant money to kind of cover a lot of those expenses. Um, you know, Prior to this year, we were 1-to-1, basically grades 3 through 12. This year, we're 1-to-1 pre-K through 12. So through the grant process, we were able to buy Chromebooks and iPads for our preschool students. The PPE, the cleaning supplies, additional cleaning staff. When we were in person, we had a contractor in each building who was responsible for disinfecting, and they just went around the buildings and hit high touch areas, and they were great. So a lot of those expenses were covered from grants. I think we've probably saved a little money on personnel because there's some positions we just didn't bring in for this year because of the split schedules and things like that. But a lot of that money is being eaten up by some of the additional costs around the logistics that we have to kind of engage in.
Now, the people that opted to take a year off,
Mm-hmm.
do you think you'll get them back once the fall comes?
Yeah, I think so for the most part. We've had the most common thing that happens is maternity leaves. I worked with an HR director years ago, and he said that the enemy of education is love. Because whenever we have someone has a new baby, they're gone for a year and maybe 2 years. So we've had a lot of experience with our teachers taking maybe an extended maternity leave and then returning to the classroom. And I anticipate that that's going to be a similar process in the fall. We're going to see a lot of our teachers that did opt, and our staff members that did opt to take a year off that do decide to come back. Some people may decide, hey, I'm going to follow a different pathway, but I think for the most part, we're going to see people come back.
Will the Family Leave Act have an impact on you?
Yeah, we've actually had to deal with a lot of the changes related to FMLA and some of the extensions. So we've had a number of folks that, for a variety of reasons, have had to take either long-term or short-term leaves related to COVID or COVID-related issues. So we've kind of been dealing with that since the start of the school year.
But now,
One of our
take half a year off, what do you do for backfilling them?
So we have a lot of teaching assistants who are interested in becoming classroom teachers. So this gives them an opportunity to get a shot in the classroom, which is kind of a win-win. One of our disadvantages and challenges this year is we don't have the same bench that we typically do. So a lot of our retired teachers who would serve as like day-to-day subs and long-term subs, I think because of COVID are a little more hesitant to come in. We're a little more hesitant to come into live classrooms and substitute. And I think people who would normally stay at home, moms or some other groups that we, sometimes get for, substitute teachers or, with their kids during the day now for like 2 or 3 days a week. So that kind of limits that pool as well.
Any last words you want to leave with the residents and parents in Milford?
The only thing is I would say is, I want to say thank you to everybody. I appreciate everybody's patience, their flexibility, their resilience. It's been a very difficult, from March until, today. And, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I want people to kind of, focus on that hopefully in the fall, we're going to see a return to normalcy. But I ask everybody just to bear with us for a few more months. People are really working hard on behalf of the students and families, but I know there's a lot of challenges that are kind of layered on top of each other that, are causing a lot of issues for our families. And, whatever we can do to help or support, I would say to parents out there who have kids who are struggling to engage, reach out to your teachers, reach out to your principals. They're more than happy to help and support you. We have counselors, we have support staff that can kind of, get in there and try to, work through whatever issue is going on.
Well, a final thank you to our educators.
100%.
Once again, they've come through. I mean, I read and I say thank you to the great educator who delegates these people to us, because when I read about the problems that other school districts and, the turmoil and the strikes and everything that goes on, and then I look at our teachers, I mean, I'm sure they're not overly excited about doing twice the work for the same pay.
No, who would be?
Right. And they're not excited about being told you got to come in the middle of a pandemic when everybody else gets to stay home. But God bless them. They keep doing it.
Yeah, they've stepped up to the plate in ways that, consistently impress and amaze me. So, again, I echo that. Thank you to all of them. They're awesome.
Absolutely. And to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today. And let's just keep plowing through this dang pandemic, because nothing's ever beat Milford before, and it ain't going to start now. Good night, all. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Have a good night, Al.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.